Japanese admirals once laughed at America's new naval construction battalions, calling them nothing more than carpenters and mechanics in uniform. How could men with bulldozers and shovels ever matter in a war of carriers, battleships, and zero fighters? Yet within weeks, that mockery would vanish. These battalions, later known as the Seabees, carried rifles in one hand and blueprints in the other. They landed on islands blasted by artillery and almost overnight, turned jungles, swamps, and coral reefs into functioning airfields. By the end of the Pacific War, they had built more than 400 bases, over 110 airstrips, nearly 450 docks, and 2,500 miles of roads stretching across the ocean. On Tarawa, a shattered atoll, they carved a 5,600-foot runway in just over 2 weeks. On Tinian, they created the largest airfields in the world, each more than 8,000 feet long, from which the B-29 Superfortress would fly directly to Japan. This was not mere construction. It was industrial warfare applied to geography itself. Every mile of steel matting, every gallon of fuel stored, every pier driven into coral meant bombers could reach farther, fighters could escort longer, and invasions could succeed faster. The Seabees' speed and resilience symbolized something far greater: the ability of American industry to project power anywhere, to turn empty islands into fortresses, and to change the balance of the Pacific. This is the story of how builders with rifles silenced the laughter of admirals, and how the sound of bulldozers became as decisive as the roar of aircraft engines. Japanese naval headquarters in Tokyo, spring of 1942. The war had expanded across the Pacific from the Philippines to the Solomons, and the rising sun flag flew over an ocean that stretched from Burma to Wake. In these days of triumph, Admiral Ugaki Matome recorded in his diary a mocking note about America's newest creation, naval construction battalions. The Americans send us bricklayers and carpenters in uniform. He scoffed. Will they build houses on coral, around the tables of the Navy Ministry? Sake, cups clinked, and laughter echoed. The certainty of victory filling the air as surely as the smoke of cigarettes. But behind those words lay a profound underestimation. The United States was mobilizing not only soldiers, but mechanics, welders, and engineers. They would be called Seabees, a play on the initials C and B, Construction Battalion. They were not draftees fresh from farms, but skilled men, many in their 30s or 40s, recruited from shipyards, steel mills, and road crews. They could weld steel plates in a storm, operate heavy equipment at night, and fire a rifle when attacked. Their motto was simple and defiant: we build, we fight. The Japanese saw absurdity. The Americans saw necessity. Islands in the Pacific were stepping stones, each too small for armies, but each large enough for an airfield or anchorage. Whoever built fastest would control the skies. Japan believed nature was its ally. Jungles and swamps, reefs, and distances measured in thousands of miles, but American engineers intended to make nature bend. They had at their disposal Caterpillar bulldozers weighing over 10 tons, graders that could flatten jungle in hours, and pierced steel planking that could turn mud into runway. The laughter in Tokyo ignored the reality that by mid 1942, American industry was producing more than 1,000 bulldozers per month. In the background of this contrast lay the deeper struggle of the war, the contest between craftsmanship and mass production, between traditional faith and courage, and the industrial logic of speed. Japanese admirals trusted in the samurai spirit of their pilots. Americans trusted in the roar of engines and the bite of steel blades into earth. One side celebrated the warrior, the other mobilized the worker. Sensory memories capture the moment. The polished wooden floors of the ministry, the rustle of maps across tables, the mocking smiles of staff officers convinced that the enemy had lost his reason. Yet the very word Seabees would soon travel with fear. Ugaki's diary entry stands as a foreshadow. What was dismissed as comedy would become catastrophe. For every island seized by Marines, Seabees would follow within hours, laying out airstrips from jungle floor or blasted coral, often under artillery fire within months. The Japanese would face bombers taking off from fields that had not existed the week before. This first chapter closes on that laughter, ringing confident and careless in Tokyo, yet already shadowed by its own irony. The question hangs: when builders with rifles landed under fire, would those jokes still echo, or would the sound of bulldozers replace the sound of laughter? It was August of 1942, the island called Guadalcanal, a name then unknown to most Americans, but destined to mark a turning point. The Marines had landed and seized a half-finished Japanese airstrip at Lunga Point. Henderson Field, as they named it, was nothing more than rough coral with shell holes and shattered equipment. To hold the island, planes had to fly. To fly, the field had to be finished. Into this inferno came the Seabees. They were not welcomed with parades, but with shell fire. Japanese destroyers shelled the beach at night, and aircraft from Rabaul strafed by day. The new battalions unloaded heavy Caterpillar D7 bulldozers directly into surf while bombs fell around them. The roar of the engines mixed with the scream of incoming shells, and the smell of oil mingled with cordite. The men of the 1st Construction Battalion worked under fire, rifles slung across their backs, spades and welding torches in hand. In 3 weeks, they carved a runway of more than 3,600 feet, wide enough for fighters and even bombers. They used pierced steel planking, each sheet weighing more than 60 pounds, hauled by hand across mud and coral. The conflict was stark. Japan relied on the natural barrier of jungle and swamp, believing such terrain would delay any invader for months. The Seabees countered with machinery and willpower. Bulldozers cleared in hours what hundreds of laborers would have needed weeks to cut. Graders and rollers flattened land that had been swamp at dawn into runway by dusk. The climax came in late August when Japanese bombers sought to destroy the still unfinished strip. As bombs cratered the ground, Seabees drove machines straight into the impact zones, filling holes with coral and gravel, while Marine fighters circled overhead. By nightfall, the runway was operational. Henderson Field could launch Wildcats and Dauntless dive bombers. The tide of battle shifted. The immediate consequence was decisive. From Henderson Field, American planes cut Japanese supply lines, sinking transports and denying reinforcement. What had been a strip of blasted dirt became the anvil on which Japanese hopes in the Solomons were broken. The sensory image is unforgettable. Bulldozers pushing coral in clouds of dust, Marines firing rifles at attacking bombers, mechanics working by lantern through tropical downpours. The contrast could not be sharper. Samurai courage measured against industrial relentlessness. Facts spoke louder than bravado. In the space of 1 month, less than 1,000 men had turned wilderness into an airfield from which hundreds of sorties would be flown. Sortie meant supplies destroyed, ships sunk, soldiers stranded. Analysis reveals the deeper lesson: the Japanese underestimated not only American firepower, but American flexibility. Builders became fighters. Fighters became builders. In Guadalcanal, the roles blurred. Survival required both. Tension loop rose and fell with each night raid. Japanese bombardment, frantic repairs, dawn flights from a strip that seemed indestructible. Foreshadowing hung heavy if the Seabees could do this under constant fire. What might they achieve on less contested ground? One Marine pilot, watching bulldozers roll, even as bombs fell, said simply, "They never stopped. When we flew at dawn, it was because those men worked all night." Oh, the cliffhanger is clear. Guadalcanal proved the concept. Seabees could build under fire. The question for the next campaign: could they build fast enough to keep up with an island-hopping strategy across thousands of miles? Through comparative lens, Guadalcanal was America's Salamis, an unlikely battleground where improvisation beat tradition. Emotion layered between fear, exhaustion, and pride. The big picture tie-in. Henderson Field was not just an airstrip. It was a signal that American industry could now reach into the Pacific one island at a time. The largest island of the New Hebrides, Espiritu Santo, became the next canvas for the Seabees. It was late 1942, and the United States Navy sought a major forward base from which to support the struggle for Guadalcanal and the wider Solomon campaign. What confronted them was rainforest so dense that sunlight barely touched the ground, swamps crawling with insects, and rivers that flooded with every tropical storm. To Japanese eyes, such terrain would take years to tame. To American builders, it was a challenge measured, not in years, but in weeks. The hook came with the first bulldozers rolling off landing ships directly into mud that reached their tracks. Men in dungarees and helmets waded waist deep, guiding steel giants onto the beach. The sound was a grinding chorus of engines, axes, and falling trees, a soundtrack of industry breaking the silence of the jungle. The central characters were the men of the 3rd Naval Construction Battalion, average age 37. Many had spent decades as carpenters, road builders, or steelworkers. They knew machinery as intimately as sailors knew rigging. Their conflict was not with an enemy firing bullets, but with a landscape that resisted every cut of blade and shovel. The rising action unfolded rapidly. Within 10 days, they had cleared enough ground for supply depots. Within 1 month, they began laying pierced steel planking for an airstrip. Figures tell the magnitude: more than 1,000 feet of runway laid in a single week, coral and gravel compacted by rollers day and night. The climax arrived when the first aircraft touched down a P-38 Lightning while steam still rose from bulldozed earth. To men who had cut trees in the morning and heard engines thunder by afternoon, it felt miraculous. The immediate consequence was that Espiritu Santo became a hub. From here, supplies, aircraft, and reinforcements flowed to Guadalcanal. Japanese reconnaissance flights reported with disbelief that a jungle island had turned into a fortress of depots, fuel tanks, and docks. Sensory detail lingers. The acrid smoke of burning vegetation, the sting of sweat mixed with mosquito repellent, the feel of mud caked on boots. At night, the jungle hummed with insects. But over that chorus came the clang of hammers and the thud of bulldozers refusing to rest. The contrast was stark. Japan relied on light infantry labor, using picks and shovels to carve small strips. The Americans deployed machines by the hundreds, each capable of moving tons of earth per hour. Symbolically, it was the clash of the samurai's sword against the steam hammer. Facts anchor the story. By early 1943, Espiritu Santo held a deep water anchorage for more than 100 ships, vast fuel depots holding millions of gallons, and multiple airstrips. It was a base larger than Pearl Harbor itself, created in less than a year. The analysis is clear. American logistics turned geography into infrastructure. Where Japan saw isolation, America saw stepping stones. The tension loop pulsed with every storm that washed away hours of labor, only for Seabees to rebuild stronger. Foreshadowing emerged. If they could transform one jungle island into a naval bastion, the same pattern could be repeated again and again, each leap carrying the war closer to Japan. Human drama colored every scene. Letters home spoke of men working 18 hours a day, sleeping on wet ground, fighting malaria as fiercely as any enemy. Yet morale remained high. They knew every foot of runway shortened the war. Authentic voices tell the tale. One diary noted, "We put down 1,000 feet this week. Sweat runs like rain, but the planes are flying. That is all that matters." I'm The cliffhanger. Espiritu Santo had proven that Seabees could create a city out of wilderness. The next question, could they perform the same miracle on an island where Japanese defenders fought to the death? Comparative lens ties it to history. Just as Alexander's engineers built causeways to siege Tyre, the Seabees built bases to besiege the Japanese Empire. Emotion layering ran deep. Exhaustion, pride, and the astonishment of witnessing jungle turn into steel. The big picture tie-in. Espiritu Santo was not merely a base. It was proof that America could project industrial power across the ocean. From this foundation, the Solomon chain would fall, and the road to Tokyo had begun. The Gilbert Islands, November of 1943, the atoll of Betio and Tarawa was little more than a strip of coral 3 miles long and barely a half-mile wide. Japanese defenders had fortified it with bunkers of coconut logs, machine gun nests, and coastal guns, believing it unassailable. Admiral Shibasaki boasted that 1,000,000 men could not take Tarawa in 100 years. Within days, the United States Marines proved him wrong. But the price was appalling. More than 1,000 Americans killed on the beaches, thousands more wounded, and nearly every Japanese defender annihilated. Amid the wreckage of that blood-soaked sand, the Seabees came ashore. The hook was brutal. Landing craft crunched against coral reefs. Bulldozers were driven directly into surf, and men leaped into water chest deep, clutching tools in one hand and carbines in the other. The air stank of cordite and burning flesh. The battlefield had to be transformed immediately, because victory meant nothing if planes could not fly. The central characters were the men of the 74th Construction Battalion. They had trained for months, but nothing could prepare them for building in a graveyard. Corpses lay scattered along the tide line. Wrecked Amtraks and Sherman tanks littered the shallows, and Japanese snipers still fired sporadically from bunkers. Yet the conflict was clear. Japanese fortifications built to deny landings versus American engineers determined to build an airfield atop the ruins. The rising action was relentless. Seabees blasted bunkers with dynamite, then used bulldozers to shove debris into craters. They hauled pierced steel planking, each sheet weighing 60 pounds, across sand still slick with blood. Trucks ferried coral rubble from one end of the island to the other. In less than 1 week, the first strip was functional. The climax came when a Grumman Avenger torpedo bomber touched down on November 24th, just 3 days after the assault. Marines cheered, Seabees saluted, and Japanese prisoners stared in disbelief, where they had sworn no enemy would tread. American aircraft were already operating. The falling action followed. Within 15 days, Tarawa boasted a 5,600-foot runway, long enough for heavy bombers. Supplies poured in. Wounded were evacuated, and the atoll became a springboard into the Marshalls. Sensory detail grips the memory. The grinding roar of bulldozers across coral, the metallic clang of PSP sheets, the choking dust clouds mixed with the tang of salt spray. The contrast was profound. Admiral Shibasaki's boast of a century versus the reality of a fortnight. Symbolism was clear. The supposed fortress of the rising sun had been converted into an American airfield faster than Tokyo could comprehend. Facts underscore the feat. More than 500 Seabees built the runway in 15 days, moving thousands of tons of coral under tropical heat while under intermittent sniper fire. Analysis reveals the truth. This was not only engineering but psychological warfare. Every Japanese soldier learned that even in the most fortified atoll, Americans would land, fight, and by the next week be launching aircraft. The tension loop pulsed. Daily enemy snipers, harassed workers, bulldozers filled shell craters. Then aircraft roared skyward. Foreshadowing loomed. If such miracles were possible on Betio's tiny coral, what could be achieved on the larger islands to come? Human drama unfolded in letters home. We are building a runway on a graveyard. One Seabee wrote, but if our planes can take off, then those boys did not fall for nothing. Authentic quotes echoed. A Marine officer remarked, "We fought 3 days to take Tarawa. The Seabees took 3 days to make it useful." The cliffhanger was implicit. With Tarawa secured and functional, the road pointed directly to the Marshalls and then the Marianas. Could the Japanese adapt quickly enough to stop the tide? Comparative lens. Tarawa was America's Thermopylae turned upside down. Where Spartans had died to hold a pass, Americans died to open one, and engineers ensured it stayed open. Emotion layering was heavy grief at the carnage, pride at the achievement, grim determination that such sacrifice must yield victory. The big picture tie-in, Tarawa proved that even the most fanatically defended atoll could be not only taken but transformed. The lesson was devastating for Japan. Geography was no longer a shield. It was raw material for American industry. The summer of 1944, the Marianas became the hinge of the Pacific. When United States Marines stormed ashore on Tinian in July, they seized an island only 12 miles long and 6 miles wide. Yet its value was incalculable. From Tinian, the new B-29 Superfortress bombers could reach Tokyo itself. The problem was that no existing airfield on the island could accommodate bombers weighing more than 60 tons. The solution fell to the Seabees. The hook was startling. Even as rifle fire crackled in the distance, bulldozers rolled off landing ships directly onto beaches littered with debris. Within hours, blades were carving into limestone. Trees toppled, and coral dust filled the air. The sound of engines echoed louder than the last shots of the battle. The central figures were the men of the 113th Naval Construction Battalion, joined by other units. Nearly 15,000 Seabees in total. Average age 37. Many had already built airstrips from Guadalcanal to Tarawa. Now they faced their greatest test, creating the largest airbase the world had ever seen. The conflict was enormous. Japanese defenders had fortified the island, but the real challenge was scale. A bomber with wingspan of 140 feet demanded runways far beyond fighter length. Coral had to be blasted, graded, compacted, and covered with asphalt strong enough to withstand repeated landings of giants. The rising action unfolded with breathtaking speed, day and night. Shifts of men drove bulldozers, scrapers, and rollers. Coral was quarried, crushed, and poured into layers. In 60 days, they completed 2 parallel runways, each more than 8,500 feet long and 200 feet wide, the largest in the world. The climax came when the first B-29 Superfortress touched down. Engines thundered, wheels screeched, and men cheered as the massive bomber settled safely on ground that 2 months before had been jungle and cane fields. The falling action followed. Within weeks, hundreds of B-29s filled the island, their silver wings gleaming in the sun. From these runways, bombing campaigns would devastate Japan's industrial cities, culminating in the atomic missions of August 1945. Sensory detail was overwhelming. The roar of dynamite blasts, the blinding white dust of coral quarries, the acrid smell of asphalt baking in tropical heat. Men worked with shirts soaked through, goggles fogged, hands blistered on steel tools. The contrast could not have been sharper. Japan had boasted of making islands impregnable. America turned those same islands into launching pads for the most powerful bombers in history. Symbolism was clear. Where the rising sun had once flown, now the superfortress cast its shadow. Facts ground the miracle. More than 8,000 Seabees labored on North Field alone. They moved over 1 million cubic yards of earth and coral. By the end, Tinian hosted 6 massive runways, more than any base in the world. Analysis drives the point deeper. Tinian was not merely an engineering feat, it was strategic transformation. By turning a tiny island into a fortress of aviation, America bypassed the need for continental staging grounds. Geography itself became a weapon. Tension loop was constant. Rainstorms turned work sites into mud pits. Japanese snipers harassed crews. Equipment broke under strain. Yet every dawn saw fresh machines rolling, fresh ground broken. Foreshadowing was undeniable. Once the B-29s began flying from Tinian, the clock on Japan's survival started ticking. Human drama filled letters home. One Seabee wrote, "We are building a city for giants. The ground shakes when they land. But we built it to hold." Authentic quotes from officers underline the achievement. Admiral Nimitz called Tinian the finest airfield site in the Pacific. The cliffhanger pointed forward. If America could build the largest bomber base in history on a coral island in 2 months, what could stop them from building anywhere? Comparative lens. As Rome built roads to extend empire, America built runways across the Pacific Emotion layering carried the chapter: exhaustion, awe, pride. The sight of the first B-29 lifting into the sky meant the war had entered its final phase. The big picture tie-in: Tinian symbolized the triumph of industrial engineering over geography and of American production over Japanese defense. It was the island that turned laughter into silence and silence into surrender. The winter of 1945, the island of Iwo Jima, 8 square miles of volcanic rock halfway between the Marianas and Japan, erupted in fire as Marines stormed its black beaches for 36 days. More than 70,000 Americans fought nearly 22,000 Japanese defenders entrenched in tunnels and bunkers. The battle claimed almost 7,000 American lives and virtually annihilated the garrison. But while Marines fought for every inch of rock, the Seabees prepared for their most desperate mission: to turn a battlefield into a lifeline. The hook came on the very first day, even as artillery shells thundered and machine gun fire swept the beaches. Bulldozers rolled ashore. Their drivers crouched low behind steel plates welded for protection. Engines roared louder than gunfire. Blades bit into volcanic ash, and black dust choked the air. The central figures were the men of the 133rd Naval Construction Battalion, joined by several others. Their conflict was twofold: the enemy firing from hidden tunnels and the very ground itself, soft volcanic ash that swallowed trucks and equipment whole. The rising action began with desperate improvisation. To stabilize the ash, Seabees mixed crushed rock with steel matting, layering coral shipped in from nearby islands. They worked by night under the glare of flares and by day under sniper fire. Each crater from a shell was filled and compacted, each ridge leveled to extend the strip. The climax arrived in early March, when the first B-29 Superfortress, crippled and unable to reach the Marianas, made an emergency landing on the still unfinished strip. Men cheered as the giant bomber touched down safely. That single moment justified every drop of sweat and blood poured into Iwo Jima. The falling action unfolded in the weeks that followed. By the end of March, 2 operational runways stretched across the island. From then until the war's end, more than 2,200 B-29s made emergency landings on Iwo Jima, saving the lives of over 25,000 airmen. Sensory detail was unforgettable. The acrid sulfur smell rising from volcanic rock, the sting of black sand whipped by wind, the sight of bulldozers crawling forward under fire while Marines advanced beside them. The contrast was haunting. For Japan, Iwo Jima was meant to be an impenetrable fortress. For America, it became an unsinkable aircraft carrier. Symbolism was stark. The very island, once designed to block bombers, became the ground that saved them. Facts anchor the tale. Nearly 20,000 Japanese died, almost to the last man. Seabees completed 2 runways, each over 5,000 feet long within weeks, eventually expanding to accommodate the heaviest aircraft. Analysis reveals the deeper truth. Iwo Jima was not merely a battlefield, it was a bridge. Without it, thousands of bombers would have fallen into the sea. With it, the air offensive against Japan became relentless. The tension loop replayed daily: bombardment, construction, enemy counterattack, a repère, then another bomber landing. Each cycle reaffirmed the Seabees' endurance. Foreshadowing lay heavy. If engineers could carve lifelines out of volcanic rock under fire, what could stop them from turning Okinawa and beyond into forward bases for invasion? Human drama filled every moment. One Seabee diary recorded, "We buried friends in the morning, built runways in the afternoon, and watched bombers land by evening. No one had time to grieve." Authentic quotes add force. General Holland Smith of the Marines declared, "Without Iwo Jima, our B-29 offensive would have been crippled. The Seabees made it possible." The cliffhanger pressed forward. With Iwo secured, the next step was Okinawa, the last barrier before the Japanese home islands. Comparative lens. Iwo Jima was America's Masada. A citadel stormed at immense cost, yet transformed instantly into a weapon. Emotion layering deepened, grief for the fallen, awe at the achievement, grim pride in a runway that became synonymous with survival. The big picture tie-in. Iwo Jima proved that no matter the terrain, no matter the fire, American industry and determination could turn rock into salvation. It was not merely a victory, it was a lifeline of steel across a sea of fire. The spring of 1945, the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War, unfolded on Okinawa, an island nearly 60 miles long, home to more than 400,000 civilians and defended by over 100,000 Japanese troops. For the United States, it was the last stepping stone before the home islands. And for the Seabees, it was the ultimate test. Could they build and repair airfields and harbors under the heaviest sustained fire yet seen in the Pacific? The hook came on April 1st, Easter Sunday, when Marines and soldiers stormed ashore under covering fire from thousands of naval guns. Behind them, Seabees landed with bulldozers, graders, and cranes. The beaches shook with the rumble of artillery, the scream of kamikaze aircraft diving on the fleet, and the grinding engines of machinery that refused to stop. The central characters were the men of the 133rd, 120th, and other battalions. Nearly 55,000 Seabees in total. Average age, older than combat troops. Many in their late 30s and 40s. They carried rifles slung over their shoulders while directing bulldozers the size of tanks. The conflict was relentless. Japanese defenders fought from caves and ridges. Kamikaze pilots hurled themselves against the fleet. The Seabees' task was to keep supply lines open, repair bombed runways, and construct new strips for fighters, bombers, and transports. The rising action stretched across 3 months under constant rain and fire. They built 7 major airfields, among them Yantan and Kadena, each over 6,000 feet long. They repaired harbors, laid thousands of feet of roads, and erected fuel depots capable of holding millions of gallons. The climax came when Kadena Airfield opened fully operational within days of capture, allowing P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs to launch escort missions and interdictions directly over Kyushu. For the first time, American fighters could range the Japanese homeland. The falling action was brutal but decisive. As the ground battle dragged on for 82 days and kamikaze attacks sank dozens of ships, the new airfields allowed constant air support, reconnaissance, and logistical flow. Okinawa became both fortress and springboard. Sensory detail was overwhelming. The stench of mud and death, the constant rain turning foxholes into swamps, the shriek of kamikaze diving at ships offshore, and amid it all the metallic roar of bulldozers grinding coral into runway. The contrast was stark. For Japan, Okinawa was the last defense where honor demanded sacrifice. For America, it was the staging ground of invasion, where industry and machinery turned chaos into order. Symbolism was unmistakable. Kamikaze fire met by construction fire, destruction countered instantly by creation. Facts testified to the scale by the battle's end. Seabees had built or repaired 7 airfields, more than 60 miles of roads, and fast storage facilities. They handled nearly 3 million tons of supplies under fire. Analysis deepens the picture. Okinawa showed that America could not only seize, but immediately exploit enemy territory under conditions of near constant attack. Every runway built shortened the war. Every pier driven meant more supplies. Every depot completed made invasion possible. The tension loop repeated. Kamikaze strikes destroyed depots. Seabees rebuilt. Artillery cratered runways. Seabees patched them overnight. Each attack was met by renewal. Foreshadowing hung heavy. If Okinawa could be turned into fortress in weeks, then Kyushu or Honshu might be next. Japan's leaders could see the inevitable approaching. Human drama was everywhere. Diaries spoke of exhaustion, of men working 18 hours a day in rain and shellfire. One Seabee wrote, "We built runways with mud up to our knees, and when kamikazes struck the fleet, we worked faster. The planes had to fly." I knew. Authentic voices underlined the feat. Admiral Nimitz reported, "The work of the Seabees at Okinawa made possible sustained operations against Japan. Ever. The cliffhanger points forward. Okinawa had been secured at immense cost. Now all eyes turn north. Would America invade Japan itself? Or was there another path to end the war? Comparative lens casts Okinawa as America's Verdun, months of attrition, ceaseless sacrifice. Yet transformed into strategic gain, emotion layering is deep, horror at casualties, fatigue from endless rain, pride in achievement, and grim resolve for the final phase, the big picture tie-in. Okinawa demonstrated that America could build and sustain a fortress directly on Japan's doorstep. It was proof that industrial power could turn even the bloodiest battlefield into a base, and it foreshadowed the war's conclusion. By the middle of 1945, the true scale of the Seabees' work emerged not in a single island or campaign, but in the staggering sum of their achievements. What began as a handful of battalions mocked as carpenters in uniform had swollen into a force of more than 270,000 men spread across every ocean. Theirs was not just engineering, it was an avalanche of industry crashing onto the Pacific. The hook came with the numbers themselves. By war's end, the Seabees had built more than 400 bases, 111 airfields, 441 piers, and over 2,500 miles of roads. These figures, when spoken aloud, stunned even seasoned officers. The central characters in this chapter are not individual heroes, but the collective, the battalions that made up the construction force. They came from every state in America. Welders from Pittsburgh, miners from Kentucky, road crews from California. Each man carried both tool and rifle, and together they represented an industrial army unlike anything Japan could imagine. The conflict was abstract but decisive. The Seabees' relentless production versus Japan's dwindling capacity, where America poured steel and fuel into the Pacific by the millions of tons. Japan struggled to repair even one runway under constant bombardment. The rising action was measured in milestones. At Guam, runways stretched across the island like highways. At Saipan, fuel depots stored millions of gallons for B-29 raids. At Palelu, Seabees blasted coral ridges into airstrips within weeks. Each new conquest was instantly turned into fortress. The climax of this industrial surge came with the Marianas, where the Seabees constructed the largest concentration of bomber bases in the world. Tinian, Saipan, and Guam together launched hundreds of superfortresses daily against Japan. The falling action was not decline, but momentum. Each completed base fed into the next campaign. By the time Okinawa fell, America no longer needed to imagine how to invade Japan. It had the infrastructure already built. Sensory detail paints the scene. The thunder of pile drivers hammering steel into coral, the acrid stench of asphalt poured by floodlight, the endless rumble of bulldozers like a mechanical drumbeat across the Pacific. The contrast is absolute. Japan sent men with shovels. America sent machines by the thousand. Symbolism is stark. The rising sun rising each morning to find another island turned into fortress overnight. Facts underscore the avalanche. More than 15 million cubic yards of coral moved, over 160 million gallons of aviation fuel stored, millions of rounds of ammunition stockpiled in bases built by Seabees. Analysis reveals the core truth. America waged a war, not only with fleets and divisions, but with infrastructure. Every mile of runway shortened the war. Every depot built accelerated victory. The tension loop played out in campaign after campaign. Land, fight, build, souffre, losses, build again. Enemies, bomb. Seabees, repair overnight. The rhythm was unstoppable. Foreshadowing was clear. If such industrial weight could be hurled into the Pacific, what chance did Japan have when the homeland itself became target? Human drama lived in scale. Men worked 18-hour shifts, often contracting malaria, dysentery, or dengue. Yet pride in accomplishment was universal. We are building history with bulldozers. One Seabee wrote, authentic voices ring true. Admiral Ernest King said simply, the Seabees have done more than build bases. They have built victory. The cliffhanger pushes forward with hundreds of bases established and bombers already burning Japanese cities. What could force surrender short of invasion? Comparative lens ties it to the ancient world. Just as Rome's roads made empire possible, the Seabees bases formed the arteries of American power. Emotion layering is thick, exhaustion, a pride, awe, at numbers so large they seemed unreal. The big picture tie-in is decisive. The industrial avalanche of the Seabees proved that war in the 20th century would be won not only by courage, but by the ability to transform geography into infrastructure at industrial speed. Japan's laughter had become silence beneath the roar of engines taking off from islands that months before had been coral and jungle. By late 1944, the laughter had stopped. Where once Japanese officers dismissed the Seabees as laborers in uniform, now reports from every front described them with awe and dread. Infantry called them steel monsters who arrived behind Marines within days, covered the sky with aircraft. The turning of fear was not born of rumor, but of lived experience. Each island captured became a fortress before the smoke of battle had cleared. The hook came from testimony of Japanese soldiers captured in the Marianas. We saw bulldozers roll ashore while shells still fell by night. Lights burned, and by morning an airfield stood where jungle had been. The central figures were no longer single battalions, but the image of Seabees everywhere, recognizable by the B insignia carrying wrench and machine gun. To Japanese troops, they became a symbol of inevitability builders who could not be stopped, who always followed victory, and who made the next blow certain. The conflict shifted from direct combat to psychology. Japan still fielded soldiers willing to die, yet morale sagged when every defense line became a runway for American bombers within weeks. Where courage was finite, American construction seemed infinite. The rising action appeared in reports of island after island. On Pelelu, Seabees built a 6,000-foot strip in 23 days. On Saipan, they restored Aslido Field within 72 hours of capture. On Guam, they turned jungles into bomber bases in less than 2 months. Each feat compounded dread. The climax was perceptual. Japanese units described hearing the low rumble of bulldozers at night as a signal that the island was lost. Men whispered that once the machines began, resistance was futile, for bombers would soon appear. The falling action was visible in troop behavior. Units that once counterattacked ferociously now withdrew deeper, hoping to delay rather than stop construction. Even suicide raids could not stem the tide. Sensory details etched themselves in memory, the grinding of engines echoing through jungle darkness, the blinding glow of floodlights as runways extended through the night, the acrid scent of diesel mixing with tropical air. The contrast was poignant. Japanese infantry dug foxholes with hand shovels, while across the same ground, Americans drove machines capable of moving tons of coral an hour. Symbolism was cruelly clear. One side fought with sweat, the other with steel. Facts reinforced the terror. By this stage, more than 110 airstrips had been completed across the Pacific. Each supported dozens of aircraft, multiplying the reach of Allied power by hundreds of miles. Analysis reveals a shift in warfare. The Seabees were not only builders, they were accelerators of strategy. Their work compressed time, collapsing months of logistical delay into days of immediate air superiority. The tension loop played out in the same grim pattern. Battle erupts. Defenders fight. Marines land. Seabees build. Bombers arrive. Defenders perish. Foreshadowing grew heavy. With Okinawa, the home islands would be next, and Japanese soldiers knew that bulldozers would follow Marines onto Kyushu or Honshu if invasion came. Human drama appears in diaries. One Marine wrote, "The Japs fear the bees. They hear us working at night, and they know their days are numbered." Authentic voices seal the point. A captured officer admitted, "We feared the machines more than the guns. You cannot fight bulldozers with rifles." The cliffhanger asks, if every island became a base, how long before Japan itself lay beneath American bombers without pause? Comparative lens shows resonance with ancient warfare. Just as Alexander's engineers broke the walls of Tyre, the Seabees broke the walls of the Pacific, not with rams, but with runways. Emotion, layering, blends pride, exhaustion, and grim inevitability. For Americans, triumph. For Japanese, despair. The big picture tie-in is final. The turning of fear marked the psychological defeat of Japan before the formal surrender. The Seabees had become more than builders. They were symbols of unstoppable industrial war, turning mockery into silence, and silence into terror. By the autumn of 1945, the laughter that once echoed in Tokyo's war rooms had long since vanished. In its place lay silence, broken only by the drone of American aircraft rising from islands that 3 years earlier had been jungle, reef, or volcanic rock. The Seabees had left behind a legacy measured not only in bases and runways, but in the collapse of an empire that had underestimated the power of industrial warfare. The hook is bitterly ironic. Admiral Ugaki, who once mocked carpenters in uniform, did not live to see surrender. His diary entries ended with despair as American bombers darkened Japan's skies from fields his Navy had believed impossible to build. The central characters in this conclusion are the Seabees themselves, 270,000 men who built, fought, and bled across the Pacific. They were welders, miners, and mechanics who had turned into soldiers and engineers at once. Their conflict was never glory on the front line, but the relentless battle against terrain, time, and enemy fire. The rising action of their legacy is told in statistics. By war's end, they had constructed more than 400 bases, 111 airfields, 441 piers, and 2,500 miles of roads. They moved more earth and stone than the builders of the Panama Canal. The climax of their impact was visible in August of 1945 when bombers lifted off from Tinian carrying weapons that would end the war. The airfields that enabled those missions were monuments to Seabee labor. The falling action came with surrender in Tokyo Bay. No shots were fired there. Only signatures on paper, but behind those signatures lay the knowledge that Japan's defeat was ensured. The moment America proved it could turn every captured island into a fortress within weeks. Sensory details linger. The thundering roar of B-29s rising from coral runways, the endless clatter of bulldozers at night, the acrid tang of asphalt mixing with tropical rain. The contrast is haunting. Japan entered the war believing courage and discipline could overcome material disadvantage. America fought with industry, transforming coral and jungle into steel and concrete. Symbolism is stark. One side poured blood into defense. The other poured machines into creation, and creation outlasted destruction. Facts affirm the verdict. More than 15 million cubic yards of coral moved, more than 160 million gallons of aviation fuel stored, and tens of millions of tons of supplies handled through bases built by Seabees. Analysis clarifies the lesson. The war in the Pacific was not merely won at sea or in the air, it was won on bulldozed earth, in piers driven into coral and in runways that appeared overnight. The tension loop had ended. Battle, building, bombing, victory. The cycle that crushed Japan was complete. Foreshadowing of the nuclear age loomed. The same airfields that launched conventional raids had enabled the dawn of atomic warfare. Human drama echoed in veterans' voices. One Seabee recalled, "We were never in the headlines, but every plane that flew and every ship that docked was because we made a place for them." Authentic quotes cement the point. Admiral Nimitz declared after the war, "The Seabees built a road to victory across the Pacific." I bait. The cliffhanger is paradoxical. Having built so much in war, What would these men build in peace? Many returned to civilian life carrying the skills and scars of battles fought not only with rifles but with bulldozers. Comparative lens ties the legacy to history. Just as Roman engineers secured empire through roads and aqueducts, American engineers secured victory through runways and bases. Emotion layering is complex. Grief for losses, pride in achievement, awe at the scale, and quiet recognition of sacrifice. The big picture tie-in concludes the saga. The Japanese admirals had once mocked America's Seabees. By 1945, the mocking was gone. In its place stood silence beneath the thunder of bombers. Silence broken only by the memory of bulldozers that had reshaped the Pacific. The legacy endures in the Seabees motto, "We build, we fight." They built victory, and they fought with steel, leaving an empire buried under runways of coral and concrete